to learn about this important decision of how to spend several millions in federal dollars shows how much you care about our community, your city. The spending plan that we will be sharing with you tonight is not final. The final spending plan will be determined by City Council in February and informed by your input over the next few weeks. The feedback that you provide us tonight will help shape city operations and our goals over the next 5 years. I look forward to a robust discussion with you over the next 2 hours. Second, I'd like to welcome and thank the mayor and members of council for joining us this evening as well. Mayor Stewart, Councilmember Kovar, Councilmember Dabala, Councilmember Kostick, Councilmember Siemens, Councilmember Smith, and Councilmember Searcy. Thank you all for being here this evening. They will be also listening very closely to your comments as they will be voting on how to spend the federal funding in just a few weeks. Now I'd like to give you all an opportunity to meet our panelists for this evening and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Staff, if you could state your name, your position, what you do, and how long you've been here working for the city of Takoma Park. I would love to start with Chief Duvall, if you would kick us off.
Thank you, City Manager Fox. Tony Duvall, I'm the Chief of Police here in the city of Takoma Park. I have been here for 4 years, but was born and raised in this area and moved to Takoma Park in 1969. Left here when I went away to college.
Director Cross.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Cross. I'm the Director of Housing and Community Development here for the city. I started way back in August of 2021, and I'm excited to be here with all of you and to hear your thoughts on our ARPA spend proposal.
Thank you. Director Jones.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Jones. I am the Library Director for the Takoma Park, Maryland Library. And I've been with the city for about 10 months after moving here from Texas. And I'm excited to be here this evening to hear people's thoughts and answer some questions.
Thank you. Director Braithwaite.
Hi, I'm Daryl Braithwaite, Public Works Director for the city. I'm a city resident and longtime city employee, starting as a recycling coordinator in the late 80s and evolving through various public works titles. I've been the Public Works Director for several years now.
Thank you. Director Clark.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Clark. I'm the Director of Recreation for the city, and I've been working with the city of Takoma Park for 15 years.
Thank you. Mr. Powers.
Hello, I'm Dan Powers. I'm a public administration specialist with in the city manager's office, and I've been here for a year.
Ms. Martin.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vernay Martin, and I think I'm one of the newest members of the team at the city of Takoma Park. This is actually my 3rd week, and my role here is to work with the city manager and the deputy city manager in the implementation of the ARPA program.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. And last but not least, Ms. Clark.
Good evening, everyone. I'm the Deputy City Manager for the city, Jessica Clark, and so I work closely with City Manager Fox on all things Takoma Park, and I've been with the city for just under 2 years now.
Thank you, team, for the introductions this evening. And with that, I'll turn it over to our facilitators that's going to lead our community dialogue this evening. Deputy City Manager Jessica Clark and ARPA Manager Ms. Vernay Martin.
Great. Thank you, City Manager Fox. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to everyone this evening. It's so great to have you all with us. We're very excited to get input from the community on how to use ARPA dollars, and we have a lot to cover this evening. So we're going to get right to it. First, I wanted to start with just a couple quick housekeeping items as well as our agenda for this evening. So as you can see, we're grateful to have with us this evening ASL interpreters. We're also working on getting our Amharic and Spanish interpretation online this evening. So if at any point you need to switch your audio language, you can use the interpretation button at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen if you haven't already. For the first 30 minutes of the meeting, we're going to be covering a PowerPoint that will give you some background as to what the American Rescue Plan Act is and what projects have been proposed so far by city staff. And then after the PowerPoint presentation, we're going to open it up to you all, to our audience, for a question and answer session. So that part of the meeting will be very interactive. During the Q&A session, you're going to have two options to participate. You can either raise your hand using the raised hand button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll allow you to unmute and state your question. Or if you prefer, you can type a question into the Q&A box, and we'll also answer that in real time. Just some quick ground rules for the speaking part of, or the Q&A section. We know that when it comes to the future of our city and when it comes to making life better for people in Takoma Park, that's something we're all very passionate about. That's why we're here together this evening. And so we're really looking forward to having a lively, passionate discussion. Of course, we want to make sure that everyone can still hear each other effectively and have a productive dialogue. So we ask that you, of course, be honest, authentic, and respectful with one another, and just be thoughtful around the words that you use. Tonight really is centered on solutions for our city. So as we share this virtual space, take time to listen to one another. We won't set time limits on what you're saying. We want it to be very organic. But just when you take the microphone, be mindful of how long you're speaking, and we will try to get to as many of you as we can this evening, so everyone has a chance to be heard. That's our challenge as facilitators. And just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded. All right. And so without further ado, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my fellow facilitator, ARPA manager Martin, and I'm going to start the PowerPoint.
Great, thank you so much, Jessica. And just to reiterate what Jessica says, we're really looking forward to your comments and suggestions, and we've got a great share of time allotted for questions and answers towards the second half of the presentation tonight. So with that said, I think we can move on to the next couple of slides to talk about the American Rescue Plan Act. And Jessica, there we go. So as mentioned by the city manager and also by the deputy city manager, today we're going to talk about staff recommendations for spending the funding that we are going to be able to apply to the city of Takoma Park. And if we can move on to our next slide, we're going to answer this question tonight about the American Rescue Plan. What is the American Rescue Plan Act, and how can the fund be used in Takoma Park? In our next slide, we talked more specifically about the act itself. The act provides grant funds. They are referred to as the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds, also referred to in general as recovery funds. But know that these funds come through or as a result of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Grant funds are provided to states and other local jurisdictions to help Americans recover from the public health crises and economic crises caused by COVID-19. ARPA funds are to be used to respond to pandemic needs, fill local government revenue shortfalls, and lay the groundwork for an equitable economic recovery. ARPA funds must be used within a 5-year period between 2021, when they were first awarded, and 2026. The city of Takoma Park will receive a total of $17.4 million in recovery funds. Half of this amount has already been received from the state of Maryland. That was received in July of 2021. The second half is expected in July 2022. And in our next slide, we talk further about how ARPA funds can be used by the city of Takoma Park. The U.S. Department of the Treasury has listed 4 categories of eligible uses for recovery funds through this act. ARPA funds may be used to 1, respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency and its negative economic impacts. It can be used to respond to workers who were performing essential work during the COVID-19 public health emergency. In so doing, premium pay can be provided to eligible workers, or grants could probably be provided to eligible employers that have eligible workers who performed essential work during this period of time. And the legislation defines those groups of employees that are actually eligible for premium pay. The third category of eligible uses for ARPA funds is that of the provision of government services that may have been curtailed during the COVID-19 public health emergency due to decreases in revenue. And by doing so, this will help the city of Takoma Park avoid any cuts in traditional city services. And lastly, the legislation provides the fourth category of eligible uses for ARPA funds, and that is to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. Our next slide just goes in a little bit further about these categories that I just spoke of. Under the first category, public health, negative economic impacts, recovery funds can be used to provide assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations. Funds can also be used to address disparities in public health that were exacerbated by the pandemic. These are some examples of the types of programs and services that funds may be used for: rent and mortgage payments, affordable housing development, utility assistance, and capital expenditures that support COVID-19 public health or economic efforts. I won't read through all of these, but just wanted to give you an example of the kinds of programs and services that funding can be provided for. This list is not exhaustive. This is, again, just an example of the programs and services that were outlined in the legislation. Our next slide looks at the second category of premium pay. Recovery funds may also be used to provide premium pay to workers who performed essential work during the public health emergency. The Treasury Department provides these examples of eligible workers: emergency responders, medical testing, staff in public health arena, staff at nursing homes or hospitals, grocery store workers, janitors and sanitation workers, truck drivers, childcare workers, educators, and other school staff. And again, this is not a complete or exhausted list. There are other categories provided in the legislation. Here we wanted to give you an example of what is determined or referred to as essential workers. In our next slide, we look again at the last two categories. Category 3, revenue loss. The legislation allows funds to be used to replace budget for shortfalls that may have occurred in the city during the pandemic. This would help to avoid cuts to traditional government services, and it enables governments to continue to provide valuable services to the community. The fourth category is that of infrastructure. The legislation specifically calls out certain types of infrastructure that are eligible for funding. Water and sewer projects, things like improving water quality, improving wastewater treatment, replacing lead service lines, and some stormwater management projects. The legislation also specifically calls out the need to improve broadband infrastructure so that it's an equitable allocation of resources and abilities of people to be able to use broadband during their work time. It was found that during the pandemic, there were many people who did not have access to broadband, and this presented problems for children who had to go to school remotely, or if you were working remotely, for example. So this focus of broadband infrastructure focuses on adequate speeds being available, services being affordable, and focusing on unserved and underserved households and businesses in the community. Thank you, Jessica. I think in our next slide, Jessica will talk more about the spending plan as developed and recommended by staff.
Great, thank you so much, Renee. All right, on to the next section. So now that we've covered for you the eligible uses and you have a bit of a better understanding as to what ARPA can be used for, I wanted to explain how city staff arrived at a set of recommendations to the City Council that were presented to the City Council last Wednesday, and that we'll be working through with the council over the next few weeks. We have a full report on the staff recommendations that's posted on our website, and we'll show you the link at the end of the meeting. But essentially during the fall, so over the past few months before the holidays, our senior staff, most of whom are on the call with you today, worked really hard to design ARPA eligible projects that addressed community needs. So we got a lot of ideas from our council members who are speaking very closely with their residents all the time. We had a lot of our department heads already had ideas ready from projects they've been trying to do or that they knew were needed. And we also got a lot of project proposals from nonprofits and businesses and other stakeholders in the area. So we had a lot of ideas. We entered them into a database. So we actually had a database of more than 40 different projects. And so then we were posed with the challenge of how do we choose between all of these projects? We had about, I don't know, $50 million in asks and only 17.4 million available. So what we decided to do at City Manager Fox's recommendation was to use a priority-based budgeting scoring process where we actually had committees of our senior staff score each project. And I'll show you the scoring rubric in a minute. But basically, we went from having more than 40 projects, and then after many discussions and the scoring over several months, we whittled that down to only 19 projects. Those were the top ranked projects, the projects that we as staff think are the best use of the money. And of course, we'll be explaining them to council over the next few weeks, and we'll see what council thinks as well. But that's what we'll be discussing this evening, are those 19 projects. And we really focused on having them reflect the City Council's strategic priorities and focusing on one-time investments. Again, our theme overall for our recommendations were to arrive at a recovered, resilient Takoma Park. And with that, our guiding stars for all of our internal discussions around which projects should we bring to the City Council were that we knew that the ARPA funds should really be used for economic recovery. We know that a lot of our residents, households and businesses and organizations are really hurting from the pandemic. So we knew we wanted to use a lot of the money to provide immediate aid. We also focused on, even though we want to help people over the short term, we ideally want projects that also have a long-term impact, in that They will increase our resiliency as a community, and they'll have longer lasting impacts for residents beyond the pandemic. And then I do want to emphasize that we as staff kept in mind that ARPA funds are a one-time funding source. So they're not a new source of revenue, forever into the future. We will lose this money if we do not spend it after the end of calendar year 2026. So we really targeted the money towards one-time expenditures that would protect our city's fiscal health. And then finally, as I stated before, it was very important to us that the projects advance the City Council's strategic priorities and that they promote equity for all residents. Here's the scoring rubric that I mentioned earlier. So when we evaluated each project, when we had the groups of staff work through and score the projects, they gave them a score, each project a score of 0, 2, or 4 along 7 different criteria. This rubric helped us ask ourselves, first and foremost, does this project that we're evaluating, does it build on council priorities, and does it build on the city's prior community engagement and strategic planning efforts? Then also, how many residents will this project impact? Will it only impact a few, or will it be beneficial to many residents? We also asked ourselves, will it benefit the most vulnerable in our community? Actually, the equity impact criteria, we double scored that category because we really wanted to place the emphasis on helping the most vulnerable in our community. We also asked ourselves, will this be easy for staff to execute? Is it something that we have the capacity to do, or is it going to be, are we going to have to hire new people to be able to implement it? Is it complex? Is it costly? What will the impact be on the city as an institution? And then we also were really looking for projects that had evidence and that were based on data of need in our community. And finally, in terms of the alternative score, we wanted to make sure that we weren't using ARPA dollars to fund projects that actually could be done using other funding sources, or that could be done by other partners like the county. We wanted to make sure that it was something that the city needed to do that would be good to be funded by ARPA. So the scoring, we really tried to help identify projects that were multidimensional, that we would get really good value from, and that would have positive impacts in multiple ways. And so emerging out of this process, overall, the plan that we've put before council, half of it, 50%, is focused on assisting the city's most vulnerable residents and businesses right away. That short-term assistance. 36% of it is invested in city facilities and public infrastructure. So renovating our facilities and investing in public spaces so that they'll be more welcoming and a real anchor for the community. And then finally, 14% were to make sure that we protect our budget in general, and that we're supporting city workers, and that we're supporting our own internal operations. And again, the whole theme was, how do we arrive at a recovered, resilient Takoma Park? All right, and with that, so we'll review the 19 projects that we selected. I am going to turn it over to our department directors now, and we'll do kind of a round robin. We're going to start with the Housing and Community Development Department, and that will Director Cross will be speaking on behalf of the projects selected for HCD.
Thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everyone, as well. I'll go through these projects quickly so we can have time for everyone to present on their projects. The first project that the HCD department has is for eviction prevention for $500,000. Evictions have a profound and lasting negative impact on the quality of life of those evicted and their families, and the pandemic has negatively impacted renters in unprecedented ways. This funding will be utilized to prevent Takoma Park residents from undergoing the trauma of eviction by continuing the assistance that the city has been providing to prevent eviction from rental housing and for homeowners. The next project is grants for small businesses. While the city's businesses are slowly making it out of the pandemic, the future remains uncertain. Grants in this program could be used for many types of services such as rent, payroll, security, and priorities for this funding will be given to those businesses that were unable to receive pandemic aid, whether they did not apply or they had opened during the pandemic, as well as for businesses that are not covered by our business associations. The next two projects are under our housing rehabilitation and energy efficient upgrades. Citywide, our multifamily housing stock is aging and old, and we hope that these loans or grants for multifamily property owners could incentivize the rehabilitation of affordable or mostly affordable units. And as in dovetailing with the multifamily housing rehab, we look to also have funds for energy efficient upgrades for homes, businesses, as well as multifamily units. And we think these two programs together will provide enough incentive for property owners to make the necessary upgrades, both in their buildings as well as for energy efficient purposes. Next slide, please. So the next two we have are for economic development. The first is workforce development for $100,000. And this would be programming to expand upon the existing workforce development partners that are currently serving city residents. Many city residents are underemployed or unemployed. And this work will focus on retraining or credentialing residents who are seeking additional training and support. And we currently have partners at the city, and this will look to build upon those partnerships as well. And the next is the Takoma Langley Crossroads Business Incubator. The Crossroads is currently undergoing a transition. Many first and second generation immigrants are becoming young adults and beginning their entrepreneurial journeys, much like their parents and grandparents before them. And this funding will support these young entrepreneurs as they pursue new opportunities to serve members of their community. This funding would hopefully leverage permanent incubator space for these entrepreneurs, be it rent, tenant improvements, property acquisition, or other needs. And the final project that we have is the Maple Avenue Complete Street. Maple Avenue Complete Street is from Carroll Avenue to Sligo. And due to Maple Avenue's context and prominence, the city is looking at strengthening transportation connections on Maple Avenue by prioritizing pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit users, which will provide a safer, more convenient, and more comfortable travel for all roadway users. And this project will be for 100% design and construction of Maple Avenue Complete Street.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Cross. All right. Now we're going to move on to the Takoma Park Library projects, and we have Director Jones with us this evening to talk about those projects.
Hello again. So we have three projects up on here. The first one is the library expansion. Due to inflation and the cost of building materials and supplies, the original amount allocated for this project cannot accommodate the building project as it was redesigned in 2017. The new building is going to address some issues the library has had with flooding, which makes raising the floor essential to a successful renovation. And the expansion and renovation will significantly impact the services the library is able to provide as a community anchor. We are expanding the square footage, which accommodates more people safely, especially in a new normal. We have emphasized use of the space for the way that people tend to use libraries now. We know that we need excellent Wi-Fi connectivity, lots of power outlets. People need to be able to use the library as a gathering space and as a place for research and workforce development, et cetera. The expanded library will also have a separate program room so that the children's area is not a multi-purpose space, private study rooms, a teen area so that the teens can feel invested in that public, again, community anchor space. And this project is, again, first and foremost for the community. The bond that funds the bulk of it was passed by a voter majority. We're very proud of it. We're very proud of the redesign, but it has just reached a point where we do need to be able to allocate some additional funding to it in order to live out that vision that we have for the building and that the community has for the building and has fought for and advocated for. The next one is Wi-Fi hotspot and laptop lending program. Under this program, we would purchase 30 hotspots with data subscription being paid for through budget funds that are already allocated for this project. So this is just for the devices themselves. Additionally, we would buy 30 laptops and a charging cart. The laptop lending program is intended for anybody who has need of a computer. And while we would aim it and market it primarily to non-students, we don't want to exclude anybody. These would be Chromebooks. And of course, children in public schools now are getting Chromebooks because they are very cost effective and also very intuitive for users. The last project that we have on here is for municipal broadband. The city would be using a program through Comcast called the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is replacing the emergency broadband benefit. Residents whose household income is less than $50,000 would be eligible for this program, and the city would subsidize the cost of Comcast's Internet Essentials plan through the end of calendar year 2024. Residents who already have Internet Essentials would still be able to participate if they're eligible. Internet Essentials participation includes the use of modems and routers, so it is a good option for people. After 2024, residents who qualify for Internet Essentials by Comcast definition would be able to continue using the service at that rate. And the registration process, the city would essentially purchase codes that residents would use to redeem in a sign-up process. And library public computers could be used to assist residents who need initial access to help sign up.
Great, thank you, Director Jones. And now we'll move on to the Public Works Department. We're joined this evening by Director Braithwaite, and she'll be talking about the projects under Public Works.
Thanks. Good evening. As you've previously heard, there are several projects that others referenced that we're also involved in, but the specific ones that I wanted to speak to tonight were the Community Center Atrium Fill-In and Dispatch. That's a project that we've worked on for several years in close connection with the police department. There's an extreme need for additional space in our dispatch office, as well as additional administrative space in the police department. The idea for this project is to fill in the floor between the first and second floors, thereby providing more space on the first floor for the needed staff room, improved lobby, and interactive place for the public to deal with and access police support services, as well as it'll then provide additional space on the second floor that could potentially be used for program space, staff space, or other needs, which is a growing concern in our building in terms of
Director Braithwaite, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're fading in and out a little bit, so I think if you lean forward, we'll be able to hear you just fine.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure where I left off, but the idea of this project will provide additional space on both the first and second floors, much needed in the police department. We have a very congested dispatch office and a need for room for supervisors, administrative staff, and community services on the second floor and additional staff space. This project is fully designed. We've had an architect on board, and so we are ready to go. And this is a project that's been awaiting funding. And as with the library project, any delays will add to the cost of the overall project. It's been one that's been fully designed and will serve needs within the department. Secondly, to the stormwater project that's listed, the Takoma Branch Stream Restoration, that's additionally a project that's been in the works for many, many years. It's one of the most severe erosion and water quality issues that the city has. City staff have worked tirelessly for years to try to identify grant funding for this project because it is a fairly expensive project. After numerous tries and not much success, the city was looking at doing that through our stormwater funds, and in fact, due to the cost of the project, had to break it over several years. Once it became apparent that ARPA dollars were available for these types of projects, we thought it was most appropriate to move this project into one that could be done with ARPA funding. Some of the key factors is we've got the project fully designed. It is permitted by the state. The adjacent property owners are aware. And it serves a severe environmental need for water quality and to assist with stream restoration. So it'll serve multiple functions. in coming up with projects that we recommended for ARPA funds, given the time frame that we're working with and the extreme, limits of city staff in terms of the number of projects that will be involved in. We selected projects that were well on their way so that we could get them going and completed within the time frame that's provided by these ARPA requirements. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Braithwaite. All right, next up, we have the Recreation Department has a couple ARPA projects as well. We have Director Clark with us to discuss those.
Good evening, everyone. The Recreation Department has two projects put forth as part of ARPA. The first is funds that would be used for improvements at the Recreation Center on New Hampshire Avenue. As most know, that facility is in need of attention, which we acquired several years ago. And we actually just completed at the beginning of the pandemic community input process. And these funds would be used to further work and moving towards us hopefully getting a new facility there. Our second project that we have put forth is funds to provide opportunities for residents to continue to participate in recreation programs. And that's residents that were financially impacted by the pandemic. The Recreation Department has always had a fee scholarship program for residents, which gives reduction to residents for participation. But since the pandemic, we know that a lot of families have been impacted financially. So we have, for the first time, up to 100% fee scholarships that are available. And the resident just has to, complete some paperwork and say that they are have been financially impacted, and they can participate. While participating in leisure activities throughout this process and making sure that residents continue to be able to be active is real important to the city, as well as the Recreation Department. So those are our two projects.
Great, thank you, Director Clark. All right, if Chief Duvall is online, we have him with us this evening. If Chief Duvall, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and talking about the Police Department project.
Absolutely. One of the most critical issues facing our community is the mental health of many of our residents. I've seen it firsthand with my family, and it's a huge issue here in the city of Takoma Park. So one of the proposals we have is to hire 2 mental health counselors in a pilot program over a 2-year period. Currently, the county has mental health counselors at their level. However, they do not have sufficient staffing to adequately address the needs of all of the residents in Montgomery County. These counselors would be embedded in the police department. They would assist the police department on violent calls in a co-responder model, but they would also be available to go to non-violent calls for service and respond to them as well. Some of the other things the mental health counselors would address is a lot of our youth who are dealing with mental issues. The pandemic has really caused havoc on our youth, and it's showing up in some of the behavior in our schools here in the city of Takoma Park. They would also work with some of our seniors who have been isolated during the pandemic. During the end of this 2-year pilot program, we would evaluate whether or not we felt at that time that the county had sufficient mental health services for the county to take over those services, or if we felt a need to still have these type of services here in the city of Takoma Park. So that's basically an overview of what the project is. I cannot stress enough the absolute need for mental health services here in the city of Takoma Park.
Great, thank you, Chief Duvall. All right, and last but not least, we have projects that'll be run primarily out of the city manager's office, which includes myself and the ARPA manager and the public administration specialist. The first project that we have listed here also falls under assisting vulnerable residents. We have a 1.2 million set aside for social services partnerships. We've left the title pretty general at this point, and this is actually an area where we could use your input. We would love to get more thoughts and comments from the community about what this pot of money could be used for. We got a lot of different ideas that related to social services, but for most of them, we didn't have in-house capacity to do it, and they didn't quite gel or crystallize. So we look forward to discussing with council over the next few weeks what this pot of money could be used for. A couple thoughts we've had as staff, it could certainly be used for nonprofit grants to nonprofits in the area for various services is one use. We could also hire consultants to do more in-depth community outreach, could be another use of this pot of money, so we can assess better which of the many types of social services that people need are the most needed by our residents. Another possibility we would consider is potentially intergovernmental transfers. So we've left this open, and it's something we'll be working on with council over the next few weeks, and we welcome your comments on that set aside. Next, also under city administration, we would like to give premium pay to our frontline workers. This would be focused on our public works and police workers who were in person during the pandemic and at risk. So we have that is a very important part of the staff recommended spending plan. Also, in terms of fiscal stability, we wanted to make sure that we had a contingency margin or a contingency set aside. All of the budget amounts that we just finished discussing are estimates from our department directors. It's possible these the estimates could change over a 5-year period. It's also possible emergencies or contingencies or new circumstances could arise that would require new projects. So we'd like to set aside this $1.5 million until towards the end of the funding period. And then we'll get to decide, towards the end of the funding period, what that pot of money could be used for. So it will be used for future projects, but we want to hold it to be used in the out years. And then finally, it's going to be a challenge to administer all of these projects, and our staff, are really, busy as it is. So we did want to, as we think about how to administer these funds, to think about how we can make tracking and monitoring and spending easier. So we're proposing a financial software upgrade where that would allow us just to have better reporting and monitoring of the full city budget. So that'll actually not just be the ARPA funds, but the full city budget. And then that'll also allow us to publish our budget online in an interactive format so that our residents can have more transparency into how city money is spent. And we think that will positively impact the city long term. All right, so that concludes the 19 projects. As a final note, I did just want to mention that the 19 projects that we just outlined actually total 13.4 million. So they don't total 17.4 million, which is the total amount that we're getting from Treasury. And that's because earlier in 2021, council already approved this list of items. So these items are in effect already spent. So this involved hiring a couple temporary positions to help us administer the funds, as well as to get some emergency funding out the door. So I did just want to highlight that. And these projects, you can certainly ask questions about them, but these are not the focus of this evening because they've already been passed by council. All right, and with that, I'm going to stop the screen share. And we're going to get set up for the question and answer section. All right. So I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their videos for this portion. And again, for our audience, just a reminder that you have 2 ways to submit questions. The first way is you can click on the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen and we'll unmute you and you can state your question, or you can type your question into the Q&A. You click on the Q&A also at the bottom of your screen, and then a member of staff will read your question out loud. So I see that we've already got some questions coming in, so that's great. For the first round of questions, the first part of our discussion here, we want to focus on questions that you have on the projects that we just discussed. So we'll take those questions first if you have questions on the projects as proposed. And then for the second half, we're going to focus on new projects. So do you see gaps in what we just presented? Is there something we're missing? Are there new ideas that you'd like to propose? All right, so with that, we're gonna, Jesse, can we remove the spotlight and go to gallery view for people to facilitate discussion here?
Yeah, can you change your view? You cannot. Is
is that my personal view? Okay.
I think it's your personal view.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to you, Jesse, in terms of our first question.
Yes, so we have Mary Machui with a question.
Unmute. Hello.
Hi, Ms.
Hello.
Machui, we can
Hello?
hear you.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Chief Duvall mentioned the mental health crisis, and but my proud thing is I've lived with mental health crisis, and my son is living in a mental health crisis, and we live day by day, and we're low income, and we're stressed to the max, and we've been stressed to the max a long time, and most of the time I didn't even wish I was alive. And I'm just wondering, we need more than 2 mental health counselors. We need a supportive network, a network underlying for ongoing network for people, not just once or two. Oh, well, they're acting crazy. We'll talk to them for half an hour and let them go. No, we need an ongoing network. And I told the mayor about a year or two ago about a project that Shepherd Pratt has ongoing in Frederick, Maryland. And I don't know if anyone's even checked into that or not. I tried to, but it's hard to reach them because of HIPAA laws. But why can't we do something like this? If they can do that in Frederick, Maryland, why in the hell can't they do us in Takoma Park? We're supposed to be noted for being progressive.
All right, thank you, Ms. Machui. I hear a couple questions in there, and I'm gonna.
I can take that.
Yeah, you got it. Okay.
Mary, you bring up some really valid points. And when we evaluated what would be best, the first step is to have those counselors, and those counselors are going to connect people with services. So right now, the way it works is we respond out to a call for service, and the police department is the frontline response. What you get if you're in crisis is triage, and we don't want triage. What we want is to have mental health counselors respond out, identify people in need, and then connect them with those services. So we're very hopeful that at the county level, they start expanding services. And there's several proposals right now at the county level to provide the services that you're talking about. Normally, these level of services will be provided at a county level. We don't have a health and human services here in the city, but we felt that there was such a critical need right now that these mental health counselors would start us down that road. And it's something that we could do. We did not want to wait for the county. So we, as the city, are not only going to continue pushing forward this program, but we're also going to advocate for all of the things that you are talking about. Not just responding out to a call for service, but after we respond to a call for service, helping the person. So the profile this is going to be similar to our victim witness coordinator. And those of you who are not familiar with our victim witness coordinator, she handles or assists all victims and witnesses of crimes. So what she'll do is she'll walk them through that entire process. So what we would envision is our mental health counselors respond to a call for service, identify a person in crisis, not only just triage it, but connect them with the services they need, drive them to their appointments if they need to, follow up with them directly to make sure they're doing okay. So not just triage and leave. And we're evaluating all of the programs similar to the program you're talking about in Frederick. So that's the next step. And I greatly appreciate you saying that we need to do more, because I agree with you in that respect.
Thank you.
All right,
So-
thank you, Ms. Machui.
So we have Bern Kelly with a question next. Mr. Kelly, you should be able to speak. I am sorry, we're not hearing you. I'm not sure if there's a problem with your microphone. Well, let's move on. We can come back to you, but let's move on to Allegra Cangliosi.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you for this presentation and all the effort that you've put into trying to work out the best way to use these funds. I have a question because I know the young people who have lost time in school and are dealing with a lot of anxiety not only need mental health support, but they also need academic tutoring. Is there a way to have a similar network of tutors that the city could help orchestrate, or is that more of a public school thing? Thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you, Allegra, for your question. Greg, did you want to talk a little bit about some of the recreation activities that have an academic aspect to them that we're able to provide?
Yes, the recreation department does offer a few programs with the academic aspect. We have an after-school program where young people are able to participate in the homework help. We actually have volunteers that come in and assist the young people with homework. And we also do other activities along with that. But we don't have anything as extensive as you're talking about. I do agree that there is a gap, and that's something, and that may be something that the school system offers, as far as the level of tutoring that may need to be required to catch our young people up.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Greg. And then Jessica, is there anything in the library you wanted to cover in terms of academic support for young people?
Sure. If you have a Takoma Park, Maryland library card, we do have a lot of online databases that are really helpful, including things like Tumble Books, which is specifically aimed at school-aged children and helping them get through math in particular. But they also have read-alongs to help improve reading skills. We have several other databases that are really, really wonderful. Test prep software, Peterson's is there as well. And the staff are more than happy to help people actually go over those databases and learn how to use them. We have a computer lab here as well, the computer center, where people can access those services if they don't have computers at home. And we have had a math tutor that's currently on a brief hiatus because of Omicron and our tutor needing to make sure that she's able to keep herself safe. But that is something that we are bringing back as soon as we can safely do so as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so Allegra, just to tie it back to ARPA, so we think that the library expansion, by funding that, that'll be something that'll allow us to offer more support for youth from the library. And also the investments in the recreation center, as well as the recreation scholarships, will also go towards youth support.
Where's my audio? Hello, hello, hello.
All right, so I guess Mr. Kelly's going next. We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Well, I did that through the phone. I don't know why my computer's not working. Good evening. Thank you all for being here and being patient with my technological challenges. As you were reading through the script, Ms. Martin, you skipped over the infrastructure section. I am a landscape architect. I live in an area where we flood in Takoma Park. I read through your entire report, and I commend you all for the work being done. I'm a big fan of public works, and I work in green infrastructure and stormwater management, and I'm a member of the Takoma Stormwater Solutions. We are currently conducting a survey of residents. We're up to almost 200 responders as to what they're experiencing in terms of stormwater. Flooding and stormwater are not mentioned until tonight, which I saw in the PowerPoint, in your plans. I would encourage you to find a way to use a outside peer review contractor, civil engineering firm to do a general assessment of vulnerable areas of flooding. And Mr. David Reed, who's a member, has also written an article about payment for environmental services. TSS has actually engaged Casey Trees, and we are now looking for their help because they do fees for environmental services in terms of, we have a lot of deer. We haven't addressed the problems of the trees that we're losing, but we're a tree city. And I don't see complete streets. Let me tell you that complete streets on Maple Avenue is a great idea. What's not a great idea is the library going in a floodplain. It's actually not allowed under Maryland state law. How the consultants of that whitewashed over how it was permitted. It's not permitted. And Paul Chorosky, who's a PhD and a qualified environmental planner such as myself, I'm not a PhD, I'm a licensed landscape architect. I work in the Rainscapes program, River Smart Homes, and Rain Check programs of Montgomery County. I would like to see some monies to get the county program to come down here into the city so that we can aggregate our ability to maintain and manage floodwaters. The storm of September 2020 created immense damage in the Poplar Valley and other parts down Willow. And one reason you see a moat around the community center is because that building was built in the floodplain and it cost us a couple $2 million overrun. I was involved in that project. And that's why we didn't get a gym. We ended up getting a moat because that's a storm water management flood area under the FEMA maps. We're not paying enough attention, guys. This is very important. Tonight on Marketplace, they just talked about it, how important the management of stormwater and maintaining tree canopy and the insects and the caterpillars and the birds. We don't think about that, but we have this ARPA money and, there's people in poverty here. I saw your statistics. What you've done is fantastic. And it's an eye opener to me and others. We're a citizen group. We're trying our best to work with you to help get more attention paid to the flooding and the stormwater management. And I really would like to see, and Ann English, who runs the program for Rainscapes, and I are in a dialogue. I would really like to see our city hire a landscape architect to interface with the Rainscapes program and get that program, which is a county program, and it gives $7,500 per property to private properties and $20,000 to each communal property, apartment, commercial, whatever. We're missing out on that. And this might be a chance for us to get in on that and leverage our ARPA money and help out DPW with, I know Daryl is swamped. That's a joke. And I mean, that's a pun intended. And that she could use help. But not to diminish the other quality programs and things you've looked at, especially the poverty program and the people without broadband and food security. But, my residents at 307 Circle Avenue flooded to a tune of a $9,000 insurance claim in 2020. And there's people in many areas of the city who are very worried about this and talk about water quality. Water quality in the middle of your house is not a way to manage floods.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. So I wanted to stop you there and kind of unpack that a little bit as you brought up a lot of good points. So you're absolutely right that stormwater is an eligible use of ARPA. I'd also mention that we did receive Mr. Krastowski's memo, and so staff are taking that very seriously and reviewing that. I'd like to highlight that just because it's not included in the ARPA plan, of course, doesn't mean it can't be submitted for the regular budget process. So I just wanted to clarify that, you know, not having it in ARPA does not preclude the use of other city funding. But I'll turn it to Director Braithwaite if you wanted to make just a comment on how this year's money is being used, because there was a set aside to explore a bit more about what stormwater projects are possible. And then I know that several council members have raised the same issue that you're raising, Mr. Kelly. And so we will certainly be digging deeper into the stormwater issue and potential uses of ARPA for stormwater and where it might fit into the spending plan over the next few weeks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think
Can you only see our voice? Can you only hear us and not see me? I'm just a
Yes.
Yes, that's still it. Yep. No, you're good. We heard you fine, and only the panelists have their videos on.
I see. So no one can see the people talking and who's in the Zoom. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Just making sure I don't have another technological problem. Okay.
I just
Go ahead, Jo.
briefly will just add that the city does have a stormwater utility fee that funds our stormwater program. So we've got a very aggressive program that works on two fronts. One is water quality to meet state requirements. The other is to deal with maintenance long-term of our system. So every year the city puts together a budget that identifies projects to be used with the stormwater utility fee funds. Last year, the council updated our utility fee program to make it more equitable in terms of adjusting the fee to reflect the actual impervious area on properties. So we develop programs. There's a 5-year CIP of identified programs. What we selected for the ARPA funding, as I mentioned before, were those projects that we had designed that were high dollar value, high cost, and that we felt we could get implemented within the time frame of ARPA. The council has additionally, in this fiscal year, put $150,000 into the budget identified as a evaluation of stormwater issues on private property. Internally, we've been meeting with consultants and others, talking to other jurisdictions to try to wrap our hands around how best to use that funds. The biggest challenge is to identify the scope of work that would be meaningful and that we could best use that type of assistance for. Given the staffing levels that we have in the department, we've developed a program plan for projects over the next 5 years, and we'll continue to develop that. We welcome any comments from folks on specific stormwater problems that residents have. The major storm that you mentioned in September of 2019 was important in a number of ways. Primarily that it identified for us several areas that we didn't have on our list of projects. And so the next 2 years, we shifted our focus and addressed those areas where we had significant stormwater issues based on that flooding and the overwhelming of our systems. So 3 or 4 major projects were implemented in the past 2 years to address areas that came to light from those flooding problems. So residents should feel free to contact me or the city engineer with any identified problems. As I mentioned, we do develop long-term program plans for the funding, and we'll continue to do so both for maintenance needs as well as new system and water quality treatment.
Great. Thank you, Director Braithwaite. All right. City Clerk, do we have another question?
No, there are no additional hands up at this point, so you could go to Q&A perhaps, or text questions.
Great. All right. Mr. Powers, do you have the first Q&A question?
Yep. So the first question is, why did we decide to start by coming up with project ideas rather than assessing the urgent food, housing, and health needs of the community? How do we know how much is needed in each category and whether we are covering the urgent needs?
That's a great question. That's a big question. I think probably City Manager Fox and myself should at least start on this one. So I think, or I don't know, City Manager Fox, did you want to start, or I can take it?
So for most of these, when we started out taking a look at what was provided, so we got feedback from different venues. We had feedback from the community through our ARPA email. We received feedback from the community through your ward representatives and or the mayor. We received feedback directly to staff. And then we had staff feedback and recommendations as well. And from that, we investigated and reviewed against and aligned with council priorities and other proposals that were already developed in the city, that some were either on the shelf or some was not fully implemented because of the pandemic. And so that's the lens we looked in trying to figure out how we were going to assess the use of ARPA. And from there, we decided to use the process that we used to get to this point. We had a lot of discussions around food insecurity, other social services programming. That was a big conversation that we had about trying to get assistance immediately, urgently. We heard from council in October, September, and November about those who need the funds quickly. And so that was part of our goals that we outlined. The second piece is more so trying to look long-term, trying to make sure that the organization and the community is sustainable post the pandemic. And so those were kind of the elements and the lenses that we used to produce this recommended staffing plan.
Thank you, City Manager Fox. And just to add to that a little bit, I think the question gets at sort of the needs assessment and the actual needs should drive the project proposals. And so I think that's a large part of why, we received the money in July. We could have very quickly, come up with a spending plan in August, but we really delayed until now so that we had time to develop a very thoughtful plan. And so, we took a few months. A lot of the ideas came from, we're lucky to have a council as well as a senior staff that are incredibly in touch with our residents who are out in the community on a daily basis. And so we know that at least anecdotally, our staff and our council are very in touch with resident needs. And so when our departments had ideas and when council had ideas, we know that emerges out of a clear sense of need. But we also tried to do a lot of census data research, and maybe Mr. Powers, you can talk to that in a moment. But we looked at the data. We looked at sort of, does the data back up the anecdotes that we're hearing? And then finally, a lot of our ideas built on previous city efforts. So the city of Takoma Park has put a lot of investment in the past in strategic planning processes, as well as community outreach. So for example, we did reference the 2018 resident survey. We also referenced the Housing and Community Development Strategic Plan that had a lot of in-depth research attached to it. We referenced the Reimagining Public Safety recommendations. So all of those processes were foundational to the ARPA project selection process. And we do have a data explorer available online as well. All right, next question.
I guess we have another question about describing, I guess overall asking about prioritization of the library and atrium project based on the ARPA priorities and focusing on improvements for one set of buildings versus trying to address sort of urgent community needs right now.
That's also a really great question. So I know that Director Braithwaite and Chief Duvall will want to weigh in on at least the atrium renovation piece. We also have Director Jones with us for the library expansion discussion. But I'll just kick things off by saying quickly that when we think of one-time investments, ARPA is not available obviously past 2026. So we did want to invest in projects that would benefit the community beyond 2026. And I think these two projects in particular give us spaces where we can serve residents better and have residents come and connect with government and obtain the services that they need. But I'll let, I don't know if Chief Duvall or Director Braithwaite and Director Jones, if you wanted to speak a little bit more about kind of the urgency behind those two projects.
I can speak to the atrium. I think it's just, there's this misnomer that this is only a dispatch area. I will be honest, our dispatch area is a large closet, and that's essentially what we're working with now. But we're looking at multiple advanced functions that will be available if we close in this space. Right now, we just do not have adequate space in the community center, period. That's not just the police department. So this not only would be able to house our mental health counselors, it also creates a private interview room, a private room where residents can come, and if they have a mental health crisis and they want to talk to a counselor in a private area. Right now, we only have one room to do that. A lot of times we're talking to residents in the open atrium area, and anyone that's been to the community center, if you're having a conversation on the first floor in the atrium, the sound carries all the way up to the third floor. There's not a confidential area in which residents can have that conversation. It also is going to create a lot more service windows where the public can come and get services. It's creating office space. It's changing over 3 of our bathrooms that need ADA improvements. So there are multiple different functions that are going to be improved at the community center. And if through the Reimagining Public Safety recommendations, there was a decision to refocus resources away from the police department, say neighborhood services or such, we're still going to need areas to place them. So these areas are not solely police areas. They could be redone to have someone from housing or someone from the mental health counselors and so on and so forth. This has been a project that's been in the works for some time. Director Braithwaite can speak to how long it's been in the works and some of the other intricacies in it, but it's a critical infrastructure project that we absolutely need to get done, not just for the police department, but for the community center in general.
The only thing I would add is that as with this spending plan overall, what we're trying to achieve is a balance. There's lots of needs, severe and significant needs. And the council and community has made it clear that public service and direct aid is a critical piece of that. Additionally, we're trying to address these longstanding and well-known facility issues within our city. Those buildings serve the public. No question about it. City staff are housed in them, but the purpose is to meet public needs and provide public service. And so we need to continue to make sure our facilities are accessible, usable, provide employees adequate space, and provide public adequate space to come and use the facilities. So I think what we're trying to do is just balance out. There's not a huge amount of dollars in this 17 million that's going directly towards city facilities. These are the ones. And I think the library project, and Director Jones can speak to this, due to the amount of time we've had into the development of the project and the economies that have, our economic situation, there's just price increases that happen due to no fault of ours in the supply markets. So we have to adapt and adjust to those realities. And I think what you're seeing is our effort to identify those needs and to provide a balanced approach that provides funding in as many service levels and ways that we can.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Director Braithwaite. And before I turn it over to Director Jones for the library expansion piece, I just want to really reiterate that theme of balance. And so again, as we said on the PowerPoint, 50% of the plan is dedicated to direct aid for vulnerable residents of Takoma Park. So that's a large portion. We tried to think, but we really tried to think through strategic investments as well. If 100% of ARPA was going towards direct aid, we really wouldn't be better off in terms of our long-term service delivery. So we really were trying to strike a balance. But Director Jones, did you want to speak a bit on the library project?
Sure. I really want to build on what Jessica Clark and Darrell Braithwaite and Chief Duvall have all said, in that these spaces meet public needs and provide public service. And the library is a space where we can serve residents better and work towards the goals of ARPA and directly serving community needs. And the timing is important for the library as well. A large part of the increase in costs is due to inflation. It really gets better with time, as Ms. Braithwaite has already said. We're also at a point in the planning and design process where we're pretty close to going to bid. Plans are done, permitting is getting close to done, and revisiting the design at this point would result in increased costs regardless.
Yeah, and as many who have lived in Takoma Park for a while know that the current design has emerged out of a 7-year community engagement process. It's an unbelievable design. If you haven't visited our website, the library project page on our website, you can see images of the future building. It will truly be the living room of the community in terms of a gathering place, as well as just a place for workforce development and many other services. So, all right, Mr. Powers, is there another question?
I think the answer to this is that we'd be able to provide it, but we got a question asking about if we could identify which proposals were made by individuals or organizations, from just distinguish those in the proposal list.
So the question is whether donations are being made to individual organizations?
Or sorry, no, just whether we could identify which proposals in the list of proposals were put forward by residents or individuals or organizations.
Oh, okay. So for that, I think, so that's something we can certainly publish on our website. I think it ended up being kind of a mix. At times, residents submitted ideas that actually overlapped with what department heads or council members had already been thinking. And so we scored project concepts, and so sometimes it got kind of blended. So yeah, I would say it was a blend depending on the project.
So just to add on that, to be very direct on that, is it was not the intent to publish the names of individuals, or if there was an entity that provided a certain concept. As the Deputy City Manager stated, we look at the concepts in total, and that's what we ranked, that's what we reviewed, and that's how we got to the spending plan. And the overarching plan itself of all the projects, even the ones that were not rated, you'll be able to find on the website, on the ARPA page that we'll cover later tonight.
Yeah, and we certainly made a point to set aside pots of money that we hope to make available to individual organizations as well, such as the small business grants and potentially the 1.2 million for social services, so that some of that remains to be defined. All right, Dan, we can move on to the next question.
This is so the first, there a two-part question. The first is, did Takoma Park also receive CARES Act funding? And was there a similar process for that? The second part is, ARPA provides significant resources for school infrastructure upgrades. Was that considered in the project selection process?
That's a great two-part question. So could you repeat the first part of the question one more time?
Did Takoma Park also receive CARES Act funding?
Oh,
and
yes.
Was there a similar process for that?
Sure. So CARES worked a little bit differently in that it was a reimbursement. So the city did submit for CARES reimbursement. We used it primarily for our previous expenditures on personal protective equipment as well as for emergency assistance to residents and emergency assistance to businesses. So that was the primary use of CARES, and we did seek full reimbursement from the county. And then in terms of school infrastructure, no, we did not score a project concept specifically related to school infrastructure. So that's an interesting thought, and probably we should categorize that under one of the new ideas from tonight around possible uses of ARPA funds.
And I would just add to that, that could be an opportunity to leverage with other jurisdictions, because on the ARPA, you're able to leverage funding. And we know that Montgomery County Public Schools also receive their allocation of funding. So there could be a partnership there.
Yeah, and that's a good point, City Manager Fox. And I think just because ARPA is available doesn't mean we're going to stop looking for other sources of funding. So it may be that there's other types of federal funding that would be eligible for, or county funding sources that might be eligible for. So that will be part of that. We'll continue to look for other funding as we go. All right. Next question.
A question we got before the meeting was asking, or I guess as part of the registration for the meeting, was asking about the contingency amount, saying just that it seemed low given that many things are sunsetting early in the timeframe for ARPA, and needs aren't likely to sunset, especially given the possibility of other variants. So I guess just asking about the appropriateness of the contingency amount.
Sure. So the contingency amount is it's just over 8% of the total funding amount that we received. I think that around 10% is generally a good rule of thumb from the Government Finance Officers Association in terms of how big the contingency should be. We tried to make our project estimates as accurate as possible. But it is possible that those could shift. I think what's going to be an important part of this process is the annual review process. So while we hope to work with council over the next few weeks to approve a full 5-year spending plan so that we can really have a roadmap and staff can plan, and we can develop capacity around the projects we've decided on. Just like the regular budget process, we will still have an annual review around ARPA, around the 5-year ARPA spending plan. So yes, it may be possible in 6 to 12 months. Maybe there's another surge, or there's other unforeseen circumstances that come up, at which time we can kind of readjust the budget amounts and again, reprioritize projects if we need to. But hopefully it won't come to that point, and hopefully, we do think we put a good amount aside, but we'll be continuously evaluating that, and we're able to adjust in the same way that we adjust the regular budget.
Another question asks about that how the decision was made to for what concepts that were received from community members and organizations to include in proposal scoring and which to exclude. I think the answer to that is that all the eligible proposals were included as concepts and scored, and projects were only excluded from scoring if they weren't eligible, but feel free to elaborate on that if I'm saying anything incorrect.
Nope, I think you hit the nail on the head. Yep, nothing was excluded unless it was judged to be completely ARPA ineligible. So for example, we did receive a suggestion for a climate resiliency authority. And because that would be such kind of an indirect project and it really didn't fit well within the ARPA eligibility buckets, we decided to remove that project.
Another question asks or says, low to moderate income residents have a wide variety of needs. Have you considered making a direct payment to such households and letting them decide what to use that money for?
Yeah, that's a question we've gotten a couple times since our presentation last week from council members. We did certainly consider that type of program. We actually, if you look in the report for our spending plan on the city website, if you go to the very end, the appendix shows all the full list of like 40 or so projects that we scored, and you can see the projects that didn't make it into the final 19. And we did score a direct cash assistance program as well as a guaranteed income program. Those didn't score as high, and we can discuss during the council work sessions why that might have been. But there's different ways to design those programs. And so it may be that there's interest in reviving those two ideas. And so over the next couple of weeks, we can certainly talk about, how much, what would be a good amount or how a project like that might be designed and whether it should supplant the other projects. That'll be part of our discussions with council coming up.
Another question is, can we hear more about what exactly the $1 million for the Maple Avenue project will pay for? Can you comment on engagement of Maple Avenue apartment residents in designing this?
Sure. So that sounds like a question for Director Cross.
All right, let me just get my notes here. Yeah, so the Complete Street program looks to strengthen transportation connections and prioritize pedestrian safety, bicyclist safety, and other transit user safety. So what the $1 million will get us is, what we have now is a 30% design from Sligo to Carroll. And what the $1 million will get us 100% design, as well as construction and completion of the design of Maple Avenue Complete Street. So there'll be changes for, to make the street safer for all modes of transportation, and that the $1 million would get us from Sligo to Carroll. And in terms of community engagement, I can get back to you on that. I believe there was some, but I wasn't here for that. Maybe Director Braithwaite could help me out. I'm kind of new here still.
Yeah. The city was the beneficiary of a Council of Governments related grant that assisted the city with getting to that 30% design. Tool Design Group was hired to develop that design and do survey work. And they held a number of Zoom meetings, because it was in the time of COVID, for residents. And they also held meetings that identified specifically the section from Maple to Sligo, and then the section from the DC line to, Philadelphia to Sligo, and from the DC line to Philadelphia Avenue. So there were several community meetings that were held, albeit because they were remote meetings. It's always hard to have full participation in meetings like that. But there were at least 2 sets, if not 3 sets of meetings that were advertised and facilitated by the planning department. As the project, and if the project goes forward, there would be additional community meetings to review design concepts and to further vet the proposals, as it does affect quite a long length of street and numerous residents and street users and property owners.
Another question asks, can there be a network of tutors to help our young people who have lost time and attention in their public education?
I'm sorry, I forgot. Could I just jump right in one more point, which is the current 30% designs are on the city's website. So if you want to see what currently the concept plans are, you can access those and get all the details in terms of what's there.
And Mr. Powers, we already answered that question verbally. I believe that was from Miss Allegra, and we Director Clark spoke to that.
Okay, got it. Another question asked with registration was with $150,000 allocated for grants to small businesses and the staff recommendation, does staff have an idea of the average grant amount per business that would allow?
Good question. I'll let Director Cross take that one.
Right, so that would certainly, it depends on how we prioritize the businesses for grants. And I mentioned earlier that there were some small businesses that did not have access to grants under the CARES Act or any other COVID relief funding. So we want to make sure that those businesses that did not have access, who opened during the pandemic, have the ability to attain funds, as well as our small businesses that aren't served by our business associations, which there are a number. And that'll drive how we prioritize those funds. We've also heard from the business community that some of the small businesses are recovering and there isn't a need as much as there was during the height of the pandemic starting in March 2020. So I think there's a less of a need, but there still is a need. So I can't give you an average at the moment because I just don't have the number of businesses we'll be helping.
Another question we got with registration is about that a couple proposals involve hiring staff, and if there's an assurance that these positions are cut at the end of the ARPA funding period, or how the city would support them afterwards if those positions aren't cut.
That's another great question. So we do have 3 positions, including our very own ARPA manager, that are supported with this funding. So in addition to the ARPA manager, we have a payroll and accounting specialist who's going to support the ARPA manager directly in terms of the reporting of expenditures back to the federal treasury. We're also hiring an IT software analyst. So, a large part of standing up new programs, especially, things like grant programs and being able to track what we're doing, is to make sure that our IT systems are consolidated well and are integrated and make sense and are user-friendly for staff. And so we had a lot of needs in the software area even before the pandemic, even before ARPA came along. So we knew that we needed an ARPA manager, and we knew that in terms of administering these different programs, it'd be helpful to our existing staff to have expertise in software as well as additional payroll and accounting support. And we're very clear up front in the hiring of ARPA staff that it is a temporary position, so it will end at the end of 2026. Certainly, we can reevaluate at that time whether there's other funding sources available if we determine that role might be permanently useful to the city. But for right now, we're looking for a temporary expansion of capacity so that we can assume the 17.4 million, which is really kind of like a second budget this year. I mean, our normal budget is around $35 million. This is a historic amount of money for the city. And so we had to have some capacity expansion to be able to do this work. But they are temporary positions.
Another question, I tried to write out a response, but might be worth addressing just because it's pretty confusing about the revenue replacement. So I think just asking about how much revenue the city lost and how that sort of works under ARPA. I think the answer to that is previously it seemed like the city would need to calculate how much revenue it lost, and ARPA would reimburse each city based on that calculation, which seemed like a complicated process. With the new final rule, cities have the option to just receive up to $10 million in what's categorized as revenue replacement or do that calculation. So it should be sort of easier to project exactly how much the city would be able to use in revenue replacement funding, and that funding has less restrictions on it than some of the other sort of ARPA funding sources. But feel free to add on to that if there's anything else related to that.
Yeah, no, we were waiting for this question. It's definitely one of the trickier parts of ARPA, and we kind of had to grapple with understanding it early on. Ms. Martin, did you want to add at all to what Mr. Powers just said, or do you think he covered it?
Yeah, I think he covered it pretty well. I think the only thing that I would add is that the kinds of projects that you might see being funded using revenue replacement funds are things that would be traditional services of government. And it's not so much that it's a dollar for dollar replacement as it is availability of funds to do some projects that may not be listed or enumerated in the final rule or the legislation. So it allows a little bit more flexibility in regard to the types of projects that can be funded.
Great, yeah, and just to reemphasize that it is, well, so we can ask for up to 10 million now, regardless of how much revenue the city actually lost. But even before that provision was added, it was a calculation based on a Treasury hypothetical. So if you actually want to know how many revenues the city lost, you should stay tuned for our council sessions coming up for the regular budget process, as well as our annual financial reports.
Another question is, given that inflation will raise rents under the city's rent control program, has the council considered using the new money to buy down that increase? And if not, how might the council protect residents from what will be a large and sudden jump in rents?
Wow, yeah, that's a new one. That might be, we might add that to our new ideas list, but I see Director Cross is unmuted. Did you have a comment on that?
No, I just wanted to say, yes, certainly that's an interesting idea, and I think we should add that for further discussion. Inflation is definitely had its historic high in the last 40 years, and particularly the last couple of months, which will show up in the rent stabilization allowance. We've been providing eviction prevention services and funding for the last 6 months, and in this plan we have additional funding for that to protect our residents who are at risk of eviction.
Another question asks about the library and community center expansions, just because they're not directly service related, whether they should be funded during the annual budget cycle allocation. Then another part that hasn't been answered asks if there's been a formal survey of residents on funding for ARPA priorities.
So there hasn't, and City Manager Fox, if you want to chime in here as well, there has not been a formal survey of all residents for ARPA uses. We relied on, as we described before, council feedback, previous resident feedback. We did have an ARPA at tacomaparkmd.gov email that we offered to people that we did receive multiple submissions through that. But just as well as prior knowledge from our departments in terms of what would be needed and also what was possible based on the ARPA eligibility requirements. And then, we discussed the facilities renovations earlier. I think, we're going into a very difficult budget cycle. So to find, for example, $2 million in our regular budget would be very difficult. And so I think we're looking at ARPA as an opportunity to, not have these kind of essential capital investments drag out or be postponed. They've actually already been postponed. I mean, the community identified a need for a new library, as I mentioned earlier, 7 years ago. And the atrium project similarly has been delayed several years. So there's been a long known need for these things. And really when we also talked to, different experts within the local government, and they actually strongly encourage investments in capital projects, because these are one-time funds. And that's the kind of thing that you invest the ARPA money and then it continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. And so we view that these two projects as having benefits for all residents on multiple levels, over the long term. And I think, Director Braithwaite and Director Jones and Chief Duvall spoke to that earlier. But I'll let anyone else who wanted to comment further chime in.
Jessica, I just wanted to add one thing in relation to the pandemic. A lot of this is related to space allocation as well. We're going to be dealing with the pandemic for some time to come. And a lot of these repurposing of space or expanding of space allows for us to spread out staff adequately. So when you're looking at ARPA funds, it's to address the spatial needs of the workplace. So keep that in mind when you're talking about the implication of ARPA, so we don't have to jam 4 people into one little cubicle area. We can spread them out and still provide the necessary service to the community.
Yeah, that's a good point as well.
Another question received with registration asked about if there were proposals for childcare or providing at-home COVID tests.
Yeah, so I think the urgency around at-home tests has come to light more recently, and was not something that we considered specifically as part of the project selection process. We did have a project proposal related to childcare. We kind of have 2 options in the city as proposed. One would be to, maybe purchase a facility and kind of expand city services to include childcare, or to subsidize existing providers, or to subsidize residents directly for the cost of childcare. So it didn't make it into the final plan, but I think that's on our short list of projects that council wants to discuss further before we decide on the final plan.
And the additional that I'll add to that is particularly with the COVID kits. And so we partner with the county, and we'll be providing kits to the community tomorrow starting at 11 a.m. We decided that because the county had operations up and going, that we would join the county and help provide the kits to our residents, as well as with the White House and the federal government providing access to kits through the USPS, through their website. So there's more than one avenue that residents could take to be able to get some of these kits.
Yeah, so it may be something where through continued partnership with the county, we don't need to rely on ARPA funding, but it depends on how big you want to go. And we know, so again, that'll take further discussion.
And then one other question received with registration asked about means testing or targeting of the weatherization and electrification proposal to lower income residents, and about more detail about the potential affordability conditions or other conditions on the housing rehabilitation grants.
Right, so as we go forward, and if these funds are approved, we'll be setting up these programs, and affordability restrictions will definitely be something that we look at, particularly for the multifamily housing rehab, which will also include and be available to condo associations as well, to be able to fix condo buildings in the city. So that's definitely something that we'll work together with Gina Mathias, our sustainability manager, in determining the means testing for the sustainability grants.
Great, yeah, and we certainly, I think the question hits at really the great kind of synergy that there could be between the two different funds. We are going to have a universal application for both the energy efficiency and the housing rehabilitation, as Director Cross was saying. So, but it's a good question. We definitely want those two funds to work together.
I think those are all the questions I'm seeing in the registration or the Q&A right now.
Great. All right. Thank you, Mr. Powers. I'll open it one more time if there's any final verbal questions from our attendees, if you could raise your hand, but otherwise, we're going to move on and talk about next steps. Yeah, so looking for hands from new, people who haven't commented already. All right, I'm just seeing Ms. Machui. Ms. Machui, did you have one final comment?
I believe that there should be reparations for low-income Black residents. And I'm sad that that wasn't mentioned by anybody else. I think it's very important. And not only because I have a Black son who, but I think it's very important to show solidarity in that area. And of all people, having the worst time with COVID, it's Black Americans and people with disabilities. And those two groups, I think, really, really need help. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Machui. Yep, you're absolutely right. And a lot of our projects are targeted towards those groups. And we note your suggestion of a reparations project. All right. So with that, I'm going to pull back up the last two slides of our PowerPoint to show you all how, if you have additional thoughts, you can weigh in after this meeting. And I'm actually going to let City Manager Fox speak to that as well once we can get the slides up here. Okay, so City Manager Fox.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. I want to thank you all this evening for joining us for our community dialogue on ARPA recommended staff plan. Thank you for attending. We want you to know what is important. We wanted to know from you what is important to you. As the Deputy City Manager stated tonight, this is a historic amount of money for our city. So thank you for helping us make sure that we're on the right spending path for the city of Takoma Park. If you did not get a chance to speak tonight, no worries. Please complete the survey form located on the city's website under the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. You can find it by going to the city website, clicking on under initiatives, go to project directory, and you can click on ARPA. And the display is here on this slide. The survey would take about 5 minutes to complete online and will help us inform future community meetings and dialogues around ARPA. If you have additional comments, you can also submit through this form as well. The Q&A and recording for the meeting tonight will be posted on the ARPA website. We also have opportunities for further public comment coming forward. Next slide, please. So over the next couple weeks, the next opportunity for further dialogue. Next slide.
I know, I'm trying.
Oh.
It's stuck. Let me try one more time here. Because yeah, these dates are important. So there we go. Okay.
Awesome. As I stated, we have several opportunities for further public comment coming up. The next opportunity for community input will be tomorrow, January 19th, at the council work session on ARPA. And following that, the next week we'll have public hearing on ARPA and another council work session. The following week, February 2nd, we'll have the ARPA budget reconciliation work session with council. And then the next two meetings are going to be very critical. February 9th is going to be the first reading ordinance for city council. And then February 16th is the second reading for city council to formally vote and adopt the ARPA spending plan. As we conclude this session this evening, again, I want to thank you all for joining us for this important community dialogue and hope you all have a great evening. Thank you for attending.